After months of deliberating, U.S. officials have come up with a new move against Venezuela. They say it's being done for the good of the Venezuelan people. But it's hard to see how these sanctions are going to help everyday Venezuelans to stand. Last year, a former UN Human Rights Council secretary described how the sanctions are hurting everyday people in Venezuela after seeing the effects himself.
Sanctions kill. Modern-day economic sanctions and blockades are comparable with medieval sieges of towns.
If you want to see the effects that sanctions have on a country, take a look at Cuba. Since 1962, with just a brief pause under Barack Obama, the U.S. neighbor country has suffered an all-out economic blockade. Now, these measures were rooted in Washington's fears in 1960 about Fidel Castro being too comfortable with the Soviet Union. This is from a State Department memo.
Every possible means should be undertaken promptly to weaken the economic life of Cuba, denying money and supplies to Cuba, to decrease monetary and real wages, to bring about hunger, desperation, and overthrow the government.
Today, U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton's comments have a quite familiar ring to them. This is how U.S. leaders spoke about Cuba for decades.
This was a struggle of Cuban patriots against a Cuban dictator.
I am confident that the time will come when the spirit of freedom will reign in Cuba.
The nature of the Cuban regime: repressive, violent, scornful of international law.
Decades of economic blockade have left Cuba severely restricted. Now, there have been some great achievements like universal housing and universal health care. However, as a result of being locked out of the global economy, Cuba has been set back. Yet, the Cuban government has stayed the course. Even after the death of Fidel Castro and the retirement of his brother Raul, the Communist Party remains in power. Cuban socialism is currently adjusting to be closer to the Chinese or Vietnamese model, but capitalism is not returning.
I think that danger of a direct intervention is always there. I think there would be a lot of hesitation to do that, especially from the Pentagon, who does not want to get themselves bogged down in another war somewhere. I don't think Mr. Trump really wants to do that. I think he thinks if he can get a cheap win through financial sanctions causing a collapse, great. If we can't get that, then maybe he needs a different national security advisor, which I think he does anyway. I think we were starting to see a pattern here where we threaten North Korea, we threaten Iran, we threaten Venezuela, but things don't fall into place like they did in the old days. These regimes don't just go belly up and die despite our best efforts. And look at Syria. This has been holding on for, 8 years, 9 years now, and that regime change still hasn't worked, yet people in the administration will not give up on that project.
So what makes Washington think that sanctions are going to work with Venezuela? Well, perhaps it's just that old American mindset. If at first you don't succeed, try again. Caleb Maupin, RT, New York.